When we talk about the American Civil War, it's easy to get lost in a sea of dates and battle names. But this isn't just a history lesson. This is a story. It's the story of how a nation literally broke in half and then was violently pieced back together. So let's get into how it all happened. To really understand this story, you have to start at its very core. And the amazing thing is, we don't even have to guess what the cause was. The states that seceded told us, loud and clear. Just read this quote from Mississippi's own declaration. There's no ambiguity, no mincing words. It's all about slavery. That's the unavoidable central truth we have to start with. So, our story begins with Act 1, a house divided. For decades, the United States had been like a pot of water just simmering, The fight over whether slavery could expand into new American territories, well, it wasn't just some political debate. It was a full-blown moral and economic crisis, and it was about to boil over. And here it is. This was the spark that lit the whole powder keg. When Abraham Lincoln won the presidency in 1860, Southern leaders basically saw the writing on the wall. They heard his opposition to expanding slavery, and they thought, okay, that's it. Our entire way of life is on a countdown to extinction. So, in response, 7 states in the Deep South made the huge, world-changing decision to just leave the United States. Okay, just look at this for a second. The imbalance is just staggering. I mean, on paper, this shouldn't have even been a contest, right? The Union had way more people, way more railroads, and a jaw-dropping 90% of the country's manufacturing. So it really makes you wonder, how in the world did the Confederacy think they could pull this off? Well, they were betting the farm on 2 things. First, that their cotton was so important to Europe that countries like Britain and France would be forced to help them. And second, they just didn't think the North had the stomach for a long, ugly war. All right, that brings us to Act 2, the first shots fired. All that political tension has now set the stage, and it is about to explode into actual open warfare. The time for talking was over. And just look how fast this all unraveled. It's incredible. In less than 4 months, we go from one state seceding to a whole new rival government being formed, to the President of the United States saying, nope, this is illegal, and then boom, cannons firing on a federal fort. It was a rapid, seemingly unstoppable slide right into war. That attack on Fort Sumter, that was it. That was the point of no return. It just unleashed this incredible wave of patriotism on both sides. All over the North and the South, men were lining up at recruiting stations, totally fired up to go fight. And at this point, pretty much everyone thought the war would be quick. One big glorious battle and then home by Christmas. Almost no one could imagine the 4 years of absolute carnage that was about to unfold. Which leads us to the absolute climax of our story. Act 3, the war's turning point. After 2 years of just brutal, bloody fighting that didn't really seem to decide anything, the year 1863 came along. And this was the year that would finally decide the fate of the nation. Let's just start with this number, 22,000. Just let that sink in. That's how many men were killed, wounded, or went missing in a single day of fighting at the Battle of Antietam. To this day, it is the single bloodiest day in all of American history. And while the battle itself was sort of a brutal draw, it was just enough of a strategic win for the Union, and that tiny victory gave Lincoln the opening he desperately needed. See, that win at Antietam gave President Lincoln the political cover he needed to issue the Emancipation Proclamation. And this was an absolutely game-changing move. It completely reframed the conflict. The war wasn't just about preserving the Union anymore. Now, it was officially a war to end slavery. This gave the North a powerful moral high ground and made it basically impossible for countries like Britain, who had already outlawed slavery, to come in and help the Confederacy. And then came this number. Over 50,000. That was the horrific casualty toll from just 3 days of fighting at a little town in Pennsylvania called Gettysburg. This right here, this was the 1-2 punch that broke the Confederacy's back. In the East, the Union armies stopped the Confederate invasion cold at Gettysburg. And at almost the exact same time, way out west, General Ulysses S. Grant captured the fortress city of Vicksburg. That victory gave the Union complete control of the Mississippi River, literally slicing the Confederacy in 2. After July of 1863, the South could still fight, and they would, for a long time, but they had lost any real chance of actually winning the war. But the story wasn't over, not by a long shot. Now we enter Act 4, the final bloody chapter. The Confederacy was on the ropes, but it absolutely refused to give up. So to end it, the Union realized it had to do something different. It had to unleash a final, brutal campaign to destroy not just the Southern armies, but the South's very will to fight. And to lead this final phase, Lincoln finally found the general he had been looking for his whole presidency, Ulysses S. Grant. Grant wasn't fancy, but he understood the grim arithmetic of this new kind of war. He knew that just beating the Confederate armies on the battlefield wasn't enough. To truly win, the Union had to utterly destroy the South's ability to make war, its railroads, its factories, its farms. This was a new strategy, total war. And Grant's plan was nothing short of ruthless. He would personally take on Robert E. Lee's army in Virginia and just grind it down, no matter how many casualties it took. At the same time, his other generals would act like a closing fist. General Sheridan would burn the Shenandoah Valley, which was the breadbasket of the Confederacy. And General William Tecumseh Sherman would capture the industrial city of Atlanta, and then just carve a 60-mile wide path of destruction all the way to the ocean. It was a coordinated, inescapable trap. And that brings us to our final act. A nation reborn? The guns were finally starting to fall silent. But the end of the fighting would just raise a whole new set of really profound, really difficult questions about what kind of country America was going to be now. After a brutal 9-month siege outside of Richmond, Lee's army, what was left of it, was starving, exhausted, and finally trapped. So on April 9, 1865, in a small private home in a village called Appomattox Courthouse, Robert E. Lee surrendered his army to Ulysses S. Grant. The most powerful Confederate army was gone. The war was, for all intents and purposes, over. But right at this moment of triumph, the story takes this gut-wrenching, tragic turn. Just as the North was celebrating the end of 4 years of war, President Lincoln, the one man who had guided the country through its darkest hour, was assassinated. It was a catastrophic blow. It plunged the entire nation back into mourning and created this massive leadership vacuum at the exact moment it was needed most. And when you look back, the final price is just devastating. I mean, look at these numbers. More than 650,000 soldiers dead. To put that in perspective, more Americans died in the Civil War than in World War I, World War II, and the Vietnam War combined. It was a price paid in blood on a scale that is still, to this day, almost impossible to comprehend. So what did all that sacrifice actually accomplish? Well, the results were monumental, no question. The Confederacy was gone. The Union was saved. The 13th Amendment to the Constitution officially abolished the institution of slavery, freeing 4 million people. But the war's end just kicked off a new, incredibly challenging chapter called Reconstruction, the messy, difficult, and ultimately violent attempt to rebuild the South and figure out how to integrate millions of newly freed African Americans into the life of the nation. And that really leaves us with this final lingering question. The war forged a new America, and it destroyed slavery. But did it actually heal the nation? The deep wounds and bitter divisions from that conflict would last for generations. And the fights over the war's memory and the ongoing struggle for real equality, well, they remind us that even when the shooting stops, the story of a nation reforging itself is